Welcome everyone to English 181A. This is a seminar on topics in the study of literary genre, and the topic this quarter is the novel, and more specifically, the theory of the novel. I'll explain more about that in a moment. When we meet online for the first time, we'll start off with some basic introductions, of course, so we can get to know each other a little better over the next 10 weeks of the quarter. But for now, let me introduce myself and give you a brief account of my professional interests and some other information. My name, as you probably no doubt know, is Joe Dimuro. I began teaching here in the English department at UCLA in 2001. Before that, I was a lecturer in the English department at the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia for 5 years. And before that, I taught in the English department at the University of Chicago, where I completed a master's degree and then my PhD degree in English language and literature. I grew up outside of Boston, and I am married to another academic, and we have a little dachshund named Clover, who may insist on being heard occasionally at the most inopportune times during our class sessions, so at least you'll know her name. My academic specialization crosses several different but related fields, including American literature and culture, with an emphasis on late 19th century American writing, the English and American novel from the Victorian period to the modernist era, literary theory, and queer studies. And when I'm not teaching, I'm usually researching and writing. I have published 2 scholarly editions of works by the late 19th century, early 20th century Chicago novelist Henry Blake Fuller, essays on the American literary canon, essays on Willa Cather, Henry James, Edith Wharton, and other realist writers. I'm currently working on a book that I've been writing for a while now about the meaning of the original Ferris wheel, which was built for the World's Columbian Exposition in Chicago in 1893. Here at UCLA, I've worn a few different hats at various times over the years. I've been the director of the English Departmental Honors Program for 10 of those years. I founded an undergraduate conference for English majors called ACES, as well as established the Beyond English series of guest speakers who are former UCLA English majors that we invite back to campus to speak to our current students about how their training in the department has helped them in their job searches and in their career paths, many of which represent a wide variety of opportunities for English majors and students like yourself. Currently, I serve as the faculty undergraduate advisor, helping students to negotiate and plan their coursework for the major in English and their major in American literature and culture. In that capacity, I also assist our majors who are contemplating pursuing professional programs or graduate study after graduation, or in exploring opportunities in employment and careers once they leave UCLA. So I'm happy to speak to any of you about any of those things. Just feel free to contact me if you wish. In the department, I teach or have taught a number of different courses over the years, including this one. I've regularly taught a course on the 19th century English novel, which I really enjoy. I've taught a survey course on American literature from 1865 to 1900. That's really my regular area of specialty. I teach a course on the fiction of the American 1920s, courses on the short story collection, and a course that I'm teaching this quarter on the concept of culture. And I also teach a single author course on the work of the Anglo-American novelist Henry James, whom you will come to know something about in this course. The best way to reach me, by the way, is by email. which is also the main way that I'll be in touch with all of you. Now, this means being sure to check your email daily throughout the quarter, and if you've not already done so, please go to the CCLE course website to make sure that you know how to find your way around its various menus and functions. I'll say more about that site in a moment, but right now I want to let you know that my regular office hours will be held on Thursday afternoons from 12 noon to 2 p.m., beginning the first week of the quarter. Of course, these are via Zoom, and they do not require a formal appointment, so feel free to stop by with any questions or help or other matters pertaining to the class. And if that's not the best time of the week for you to meet with me, by all means, let me know and we can make an appointment to meet at a different time of week at a different time. Let me now explain what this course is about. The contemporary word theory comes from a late Latin term derived from the Greek theoria, meaning contemplation or speculation. Theoria comes from the Greek theoros, meaning spectator. Theories are based on general principles that are sometimes independent of the thing that they are attempting to explain. And this is what makes the study of theory somewhat abstract and general. When we talk about a theory of the novel, we're not referring to the particular attributes of any single work of long prose fiction, although we will probably have a lot to say about the 3 novels that we'll be reading in this seminar. In a sense, what we're doing in class is learning how to speculate and think clearly about the many dimensions of this most pervasive and flexible literary genre as it developed over the last 3 centuries. To do this, we will focus on a set of suppositions or a system of ideas intended to explain what novels are, where they come from, what cultural role they play, and how they do what they do. What do novels set out to do? And why do they do it the way they do? Our point of departure for discussing these and other questions includes considering a number of classic statements made about the novel, and some important revisions of literary history offered by critics, philosophers, contemporary theorists, cultural commentators, and even by novelists themselves. In our own time, the study of the novel typically involves 2 distinct overlapping categories of inquiry. First, the historical development of the genre of the novel, and secondly, the conventions and technical devices that novels have developed to tell their stories. We call this latter field narratology. Literary historians, on the other hand, study the novel's linguistic, social, and artistic development over time, considering topics like fiction's relationship to everyday reality, the rise and growing influence of the European and American bourgeoisie, the predominance of capitalism and consumerism in Western culture, the spread of literacy and print culture throughout the crucial period of the 18th and 19th centuries, philosophical and moral questions concerning the relationship between truth and fiction, and finally, the discursive origins or impact of other kinds of writing traditions that underlie the content and form of modern novels. Unlike literary historians, narratologists take a rather different approach to studying the novel, focusing primarily on its formal and aesthetic elements, as well as the ways in which novels adapt devices used in other kinds of storytelling. They generally examine the rhetorical and structural features of novels, including methods of representing fictional persons, or what we call characters, the construction of plots, and the simulation of the passing of time, the manipulation of point of view, or who is telling the story, and the way novelists construct the reader's relationship to the literary texts they are reading. We will apply what we are learning by examining 3 classic 19th century English novels: Jane Austen's Emma from the year 1815, Charles Dickens' Great Expectations from 1861, and Henry James's The Portrait of a Lady from 1881. This class is a seminar that meets once a week for about 3 hours. Now, I have designed it with the assumption that all of you are able to commit to the regularly scheduled Zoom meetings to be held on Tuesdays from 3 to 5:50 p.m. This means making sure you have a reliable internet connection and a fairly quiet workspace to be in during class, and enough time in your weekly schedule to commit to the full 3 hours, with short breaks interspersed between that time. I will also record these Zoom meetings and make them available to you on the CCLA website for review after each class session. If for some exceptional reason you cannot make this regular schedule, or if you have to miss a session, please let me know as soon as possible. Seminars, as you may know, are a different learning experience from more typical lecture classes that you may be used to taking. And the expectations are different as well. They have a limited enrollment of 10 students, which means having more direct interaction with each other and with me. Consequently, you have to be fully present in the class, whether that means actively listening, contributing comments and questions, responding to your fellow seminar members, or delivering short oral presentations. The ultimate success of the seminar as a learning experience depends entirely upon each individual's contribution and responsibility to the other members of the course. There is also a protocol to follow in conducting yourself in a virtual classroom. And it's very similar to what we do in a live classroom. That is, you may be called upon to speak, but in most cases, students will generate and develop the discussion. This means indicating you wish to say something by using a finger gesture on screen to be acknowledged. We need to see everyone on screen in order to pick up on these visual gestures. You may also, in some cases, use the message function on your Zoom screen to indicate that you want to say something or respond to something that someone else has said, but I would prefer that everyone remain visible on screen and use the gestures rather than the message board. We will all let someone speak without interruption, and those who are inspired to speak a lot in every class, I would politely ask you that you be conscious of other people's time and make room for other voices. Not everyone is naturally inclined to public speaking, especially in the classroom environment, where people are also listening and trying to absorb information. For this reason, it's important to respect other seminar members' ideas and maintain a civil level of interaction with each other. Now, at the outset, I'd like to be clear about how much time, work, and effort you will need to complete the course to your satisfaction and to get the most out of it. I am, of course, aware that this is probably not the only course you're taking this quarter, or the fact that the majority of you have additional responsibilities in the form of jobs and family matters and other crucial activities going on in your lives. I'm also very aware of how the current pandemic, the various natural disasters we're experiencing, and the general unrest are impacting our normal routines, our health, and our commitments in unprecedented ways. These conditions, as you well know, may change for the better or worse in a moment's time, or they may linger the way they are for some time to come. I must say that I feel personally disappointed that I won't be in the classroom with you, which is my natural inclination, as it is probably yours as well. The direct interaction, spontaneity, and energy of a live class cannot easily be replaced by remote learning. Even more heartbreaking is the profound sense of disappointment you must be feeling about this strange, isolating interruption of your college career, and the general feeling of uncertainty about your future. But learning never really ceases. Curiosity never really withers. And the human spirit, I think, is made to overcome obstacles like the ones we're facing, no matter how daunting they may seem to us at the time. Let me just say, however, that this difficult time in your lives can also be a surprisingly productive, creative, and yes, even joyful period of greater reflection and revaluation of your goals and dreams. You're being tested in ways that previous generations were also tested, and it's just that we have taken so much for granted for so long that these conditions seem highly unusual and challenging for us. Let me assure you that we will all get through this and will be better people for having endured it. Having said that, in planning the syllabus and the design of the course, I've carefully calculated the amount of time and work you should put into the class by using the university's own guidelines, of which I'll remind you in a moment. The class, for example, carries 5 academic units, which means that for each one of those units, 3 hours of instruction, reading, writing, or other kinds of participation are required per week to meet the educational goals of the course. That means you can expect to put in 15 hours per week. 3 hours of that total are, of course, dedicated to the weekly class meetings themselves, and the other 12 hours are to be spent viewing the hour-long presentations, completing the weekly readings, and preparing notes and/or oral presentations for the class, as well as completing various writing assignments at various lengths. With regard to reading time in particular, I estimate that it takes about 1 hour to read between 20 and 30 pages of text carefully. At least that's what it takes for me, and I'm a pretty slow reader. Now, some of you may require less or more time than this. In general, if you can manage to read between 20 to 50 pages per day, you will more than likely be able to complete the reading in time for each class meeting. Now, some of the readings are quite dense and some are not, so that certainly has to be factored into your time management. I should also say that even though the novels may seem easier to read than the theoretical materials, they ought to be approached with the same care and analytical scrutiny that you would use in reading those theoretical materials. Before the class officially begins, make sure to get all of the texts in order that you will need. The first thing to do, for instance, is to download and print out hard copies of all the PDF documents required for the course, so you'll have them ready for each class. These documents have all been uploaded already to the CCLE course website, where you will also find a copy of the course syllabus, links to the required video presentations, as well as various writing assignments and research guidelines. Please note that not all of the video presentation links are up yet, but they will be there in time for you to view them in the upcoming weeks of the course. I will always send a reminder when new postings appear. The same, I should say, is also true of the various writing assignments, which I'm still producing and will upload as soon as those are completed. In a column on the left side of the CCLE site page, you'll find the weekly schedule of readings, viewings, and assignments. Click on each of the weekly links to find which readings you need to download at the bottom of the page under the schedule. The video links may also be found there as well. Note that not all weeks have PDFs because they are classes that feature the actual novels we are reading, or essays drawn from the theory of the novel text that I asked you to buy for the class. The schedules for each week, as well as your course syllabus, will make this clear. The other texts that you will need include 3 novels. Ideally, purchasing the physical books and having them with you in the seminar meetings is preferable to using online versions of the texts, which usually have no page numbers or other helpful apparatus. I'm not as concerned with whatever edition of Jane Austen's Emma that you use this quarter, although I did order the Penguin edition from the UCLA bookstore. I'm more concerned with the other novel titles because in the case of Charles Dickens' Great Expectations and Henry James's The Portrait of a Lady, many different editions are in print. With the Dickens novel, some versions are abridged, which means large sections have been deleted from the original to create a book more suitable for younger readers. This is one reason I chose the Broadview edition of that novel for this course, because it represents in full what Dickens intended. The Broadview edition also comes with a good introduction, annotations, and a really helpful supplemental readings that place the novel into its historical context. There is also a handy bibliography of sources that will be useful to those of you who may want to pursue a research topic on this particular novel. The case of Henry James's The Portrait of a Lady is even more consequential. That's because James revised the original 1881 text completely in 1908. He did this to a large number of his works in the first decade of the 20th century in order to bring out a deluxe multi-volume edition of most of his writing over the previous 30 years. He also wrote his famous prefaces for each volume of what is now generally known as the New York edition of the works of Henry James. Critics differ widely about the effects of James's later revisions of his novels because he had by that time developed a very different style. More elaborate sentence structures, more complex syntax, very long paragraphs, and other features that made his work more ornate and dense compared to the relatively straightforward prose style he used in his earlier writing. Part of the reason for the stylistic changes had to do with the evolution of James's art as a novelist. As his career developed internationally over time, his writing became more experimental, more psychological, and more complex. Today, we think of his last three novels as belonging to the early modernist period, including The Ambassadors, The Wings of the Dove, and his last completed novel, The Golden Bowl. These novels are considered masterpieces of modernist prose fiction, praised by people like Ezra Pound and other younger members of the modernist movement. But The Portrait of a Lady is somewhat unique in this regard. It was James's first full-length novel to attract wide critical attention and admiration, and whereas many critics find that James's late revisions to his earliest works obscured their clarity, most of them agree that The Portrait is an exception to this. James's later revisions actually enriched the novel significantly in hundreds of small ways. The problem is that even today, both the 1881 and the 1908 versions of the novel are still in print, and it is sometimes hard to tell which text has been reprinted in which edition. We want to read the later edition, which is the text the Norton Critical edition of the novel reprints. The other advantage of using that edition is its inclusion of James's famous preface to the novel, which is on our reading list. And, as in the case of the Broadview edition of Great Expectations, the Norton edition of The Portrait of a Lady is also fully annotated, includes selected critical essays reprinted in the back of the book, and offers an excellent bibliography of primary and secondary sources for further research. The other required textbook for the course, in addition to the three novels I mentioned, is a large collection of essays edited by Michael McKeon called Theory of the Novel. Of course, it's kind of inside out, but in any case, we'll be reading 14 of these essays at various times throughout the quarter, so this is the book that you really need to get. As I said before, always have these materials with you during class time, as well as a notebook and pen for jotting down questions, ideas, or comments that you may have. The theoretical readings are in some cases challenging because they include ideas that may be quite new to you. Some of these ideas and arguments involve us knowing something about the references they make to other works of literature, literary movements, historical events, and the specific names of writers you may not at this time be very familiar with. You may need to look up certain words and references as you read, or ask about them in our class meetings. For the most part, though, you should be perfectly able to locate, grasp, and be able to summarize for yourself in your own words the main claims that are being made in each case. So have patience and treat the experience like the intellectual adventure that it is truly meant to be. The key to a good education, after all, is to maintain an active curiosity about the things you don't know and to seek out new ways of thinking and new kinds of information that come your way. Let me now review how the class will work. At the end of the syllabus, use the reading and viewing schedule as well as the assignment schedule to plan out your weekly tasks ahead of time. You'll note that one part of the class is asynchronous, which means you have more flexibility with the time you devote to that material. And the other part of the class is synchronous, which means that we will be following the day and time schedule that the registrar's office has assigned for us. This simply means that we will agree to meeting via Zoom once a week on Tuesdays from 3 to 5:50 p.m. You must log on before the meeting starts and then click the Zoom link on the CCLE website. On the other hand, the pre-recorded video lectures can be viewed anytime during the week, as long as you make sure to view the right ones before the class meeting, in which we are scheduled to discuss that material. For example, the video labeled Lecture 1, Defining the Novel, must be watched before, not during, our class meeting in Week 2, and it will be available for you to do that at least a full week before that meeting. Most of the video lectures are about an hour long, and the links to access them may be found under the weekly schedule when they are due for discussion. Remember to take notes as you view the presentation, and keep in mind that each one usually concludes with a summary of that lecture's main points, important topics, or questions related to the content of that particular video. Just so you know, some of the later videos have not yet been posted, but I will send notifications well ahead of time when they do appear. We begin the course by diving right into the richest source of information about novels that we have, namely the various kinds of openings we find novelists writing when this literary form was in its earliest phase of development. What I mean specifically are the notices, dedications, prefaces, first chapters, preludes, and acknowledgments that many writers in the 18th century included in such famous early novels as Oroonoko by Aphra Behn, Pamela by Samuel Richardson, Moll Flanders by Daniel Defoe, and Tom Jones by Henry Fielding, to name a few. The first lecture presentation will explain this approach in more detail. But suffice it to say for now that these openings, which have largely disappeared from many modern novels, we're not used to seeing them, that is, are often the place where writers sometimes apologize for writing fiction, or offer definitions and explanations of the new form they're presenting. At a time when the form of the novel was in its nascent phase of development, readers and writers did not quite know what to make of them as literary works or as entertainment. The PDF materials for the second week contain some very good examples of how the terms of novels came into being, that is to say, the way we now talk about them, as well as raise a number of issues about what kind of writing novels represented in the culture at large. It's also a fascinating body of ideas having to do with how the relationship between authors and readers was established, giving us some important foundational material for launching into contemporary theories of the novel. The other listed readings for Week 2 are mostly about broad conceptions of thinking about novels and their historical origins, which again will help establish a good basis for our further inquiries. The important thing to keep in mind as we go forward is that we all want to be conversant in the same critical language used to discuss and write about this topic. I know we are all starting at different levels of knowledge and understanding at the outset, but the intent of this class, as it is in many other classes, is to bring us to a common level of learning and understanding and to have us share the same kind of professional academic language in talking about novels. By week 3, with a good deal of the theoretical and historical information under our belts by that time, we'll read and discuss the first of our 3 novels, Jane Austen's Emma. Now, some of you obviously may have read this book before, or certainly have heard of it, or have seen film versions of it, which is fine. But now we're reading it through a specific kind of critical lens to see what we can learn by applying the theoretical and historical materials to the novel. Let me just remind you that watching a film version of Emma, as tempting as that may seem, is not, for the purposes of this course, an adequate substitution for reading the book. Same goes for audio versions of these books. From Jane Austen, we move on to one of the most technically accomplished Victorian novels, Charles Dickens' Great Expectations. We'll take the book 1 volume at a time, so that we can place our understanding of it within the context of the Western European tradition of the Bildungsroman, or the so-called novel of development. We will explore the way the text is embedded in the history and cultural consequences of English imperialism and colonialism, as well as learning to make fine distinctions between fiction, dreams, ideology, and other forms of false consciousness. By mid-quarter, we will delve into some narratology, using Dickens again as our model. We will examine literary devices such as point of view, free indirect discourse, the concept of character in fiction, forms of consciousness in fiction, plots, major and minor characters, gender representation, and other related topics. This foundation in narrative point of view will allow us to explore modern advancements in focalization, perspective, and representations of the stream of consciousness. As we begin reading the 3rd and last novel on our schedule, Henry James's The Portrait of a Lady, we will read alongside it what the author himself has to say about the art of the novel. We will study what realism means in literary terms and what the differences are between social and psychological realism. As the course reaches the final 2 weeks, we will devote that time to your writing and research. At that point, the seminar will take on more of a writing workshop form, where we read each other's drafts, make constructive comments, and share our ideas. I will tell you more about the research paper very soon, and there will be plenty of guidance offered for that along the way. The project can be completed online without having to go to a library. Having said that, you should begin to familiarize yourself, if you haven't already done so, with the UCLA Library website, especially the various online databases that are available for research in literature and in the humanities. I will certainly help you with this part of the course as we go along, but for now the best thing you can do is decide fairly early on which of the 3 novels we are reading that you would like to focus on in your research paper. Also remember that some of the shorter writing assignments are directly related to your final project, so you'll be working on the research paper in stages. The final paper will be due during finals week, so please see the course syllabus for details. With that, I look forward to meeting you all and answering any questions you may have about the syllabus or about the comments I've made in this presentation. So until then, take care and we'll see you soon.